one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. The school committee meeting of Monday, June 7th, 2021. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. We'll start tonight's meeting with open forum. Is there anyone who would like to address the school committee at open forum? All right, I see that there's no one to address the committee tonight, so I'll go ahead and close open forum and turn it over to our business agenda. And for that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start with what I already let you know in the update on Friday, which was that last week was the first week all school year in which we hit 0 COVID cases. I don't want to jinx this another full week this week, but it really was an important milestone that we finally were unaffected by COVID for an entire week. Been a long haul. Quite a lot to get here, but it really felt good. I hope that it's a sign of what's to come. I do want to mention, though, that testing continues. We tested this week, which will be the last week we test school year. Next week, because it's a short week, doesn't make sense to do the testing. Reflex testing but we're going to continue to do the testing through the summer, and our summer programs will have the testing for the students who consent with tests for central office during the summer. And at this point, we anticipate that we'll be testing next school year as well. Now, that's still a developing situation with the state, so I don't want to commit to that, but in this moment, based on the information that we have, we do think that that's going to continue. We believe that they're going to continue to pay for it, which would be a significant factor in the decision we make. If we continue to have no cases and they stop paying for it, then I think it would be a very fair question as to whether or not we want to continue testing if there are no positive cases and we have to pay for it. But if the state's going to pay for it, the expectation is that we would continue, and I think that that makes a lot of sense because even though we had 0 cases this week, for the last few weeks before last week, while the cases were declining in the city, a significant number of those cases were still being found through pool testing. And that really, I think, highlights the value of it, right? I mean, the week before, the week that we had no cases last week, half the cases in the city were caught by our pool testing program. So if we see any sort of resurgence, it'll make sense for the pool testing to help us catch that. But there's more. I think the state's thinking about making some alterations to how we do it. So I'll keep the committee informed, but I just wanted to point out that while it feels good to hit 0, I don't anticipate that we're done with testing right yet. So any questions about that? All right. Obviously, the big news today were temperatures. The temperatures are, so first of all, we have 5 buildings that are currently unair conditioned. And the rest of the district is air conditioned. In those buildings, the average temperatures this morning were in the mid-70s. That makes a lot of sense because the temperatures got down into the low 70s last night. We're able to pull in fresh air. So the starting place for the building is often set by those evening temperatures. And where we've had real problems with temperatures in our buildings, it's always been associated with the fact that the evening temperatures didn't drop enough for us to bring temperatures down. So it was hot in the buildings yesterday. We were able to bring in the cold air last night. And then today's starting temps were low. And when the starting temps aren't low to begin with, that's always the start of a really bad day. So we are hopeful that with lows tonight at 70, that we will once again be able to bring down the temperatures in these schools. But lower, 70s or not, they definitely did climb during the day in those buildings. By midday, we had temps in the low 80s in those buildings. And by the close of the day, which, more time in the sun, more time with all the students in the building, we had some buildings which peaked out in those low 80 temperatures. And then we had 2 buildings, Billet and Attleboro High School, specifically up on the third floor of Attleboro High School, those temperatures got up to the high 80s, 87, 88 degrees. So those are high temperatures. There's no question that they are uncomfortable. And even the schools where the temperatures didn't get above 81, 82, there's no question that that's uncomfortable. We had those schools, we encourage those schools to do extra mask and water breaks. And we are urging that classrooms that are in the hotter parts of the building, because of course, we're talking about average temperatures. There are certain classrooms that are warmer and others that are not as warm, right? That's a function of how many kids are in each room, how big the room is. I was in Wamsutta today, which is one of the schools that's not air conditioned, and literally you can feel the difference just from classroom to classroom based on the size of the room and how many people are in it. So given that we have this fluctuation temperatures, we're really encouraging that the rooms that are getting hot, take a break, get the kids out of the room, go outside. And while it's hot outside, with the breeze that we were experiencing today in the shade, it was actually quite pleasant, more so than it was in the classrooms. And so we're giving teachers the discretion to, take those extra breaks, make sure kids are hydrated, and go outside and make use of outdoor spaces as much as possible. I know that some people are unhappy with the fact that we can't keep the schools at a temperature that we'd all like to at this time. But I just want to point out that while I take a pleasure in anyone being uncomfortable, uncomfortable is not the same as unsafe. And we have lots of systems in place to make sure that we're not putting our staff and students in an unsafe environment. And I'm here to report that today we were able to complete the day without reaching any unsafe levels. And unless things become unsafe, we're going to continue to have school. It's the same kind of decision we make in other situations. And while I think sometimes there's pressure to do something because things are not optimal, I just want to remind us all that we have a 180 days of school year. This year was certainly disrupted in many ways by that, but under normal circumstances, we scheduled the school year, and it's really, really important that we have school in the days we tell people there's going to be school to the fullest extent possible. And so while I think there was some sentiment out there that some people were doing early release today, even though a majority of communities were not. I don't see why we would do that just because conditions aren't optimal. People are counting on us, and because it wasn't unsafe, there's no reason for us not to stay open. And for families that feel like that's not a good choice for them and don't agree, you always have the right to keep your kids home. Right? I just think that it's a lot easier for families who want their kids to be home to keep them home than it is for parents who want their kids to be in school to not have that option, which is why whenever we can have school open on a day that's scheduled, that's what we're going to have. And that's what we did today. And that is the plan for tomorrow. We've already put the message on Facebook. There's no reason to believe that tomorrow is going to be much different than it was today. That includes not having much hope for being particularly better. But given what tonight's temperatures are supposed to be and how things went in the buildings today, we're expecting a very similar set of conditions tomorrow. Further questions?
No, Sawyer?
Was and how disruptive it was, because apparently some of the students in her classrooms called their parents to bring cold drinks, because she said that the water fountain that she knows of was room temperature and not refreshing. And she was wondering how come, like, coming from the other schools where they have those wonderful fountains where you can refill, like how come the high school doesn't have something like that? And to be honest with you, I have a hard time hearing you over the fan here. So it's very loud. So I can't imagine what the students have to put up with just to hear the teachers and being spaced out just like we're spaced out. And I feel that I barely heard what you said about half day or early dismissal. I feel like when it is this temperature in the classrooms are that hot, We should be calling for an early dismissal. Because my daughter said someone actually fainted in the school, and that's not the first time I've heard that. But that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
I'll try to speak up. I'm sorry, didn't know that you could hear me down there.
We have the big turbine down here.
Yeah, no,
Yes, yes.
I can see it now that you pointed out. The good news in all of this is that our problems with warm buildings are going to be a short-term problem. We have we have 5 schools that currently have an air conditioning problem, right? So the high school and Willett are the ones that we traditionally talk about. Those are obvious. This building, as we're all experiencing, is not air conditioned. It usually has partial air conditioning, but that air conditioning has to be repaired. And Thatcher has partial air conditioning as well. So that's the 4th building. So again, part of the building's air conditioning, part is not. And that was true today. And then the final building is Wamsutta, which is air conditioned, but as we've talked about in other settings, that system has failed and has to be completely replaced. So we have these 5 schools that don't have air conditioning, and again, 2 of them are partial. One of them needs to be fixed. The other 2 are perennial problems. Well, the high school is resolved as an issue when we move into the new building. So we only have 1 more year under that problem for that building. And then Wamsutta and Studley are both covered under the performance contract that we have reached with Trent. So those 2 systems, which we are aware of and need to be fixed, have been included in that process. And so there are plans to address that. And that includes an expansion of the air conditioning here at Studley. So both Wamsutta will be replaced, and that will fix that building back to being fully air conditioned. And with Studley, under the performance contract is addressed, this building will be fully air conditioned as well. And then the final piece is that under ARPA, which is the federal stimulus money to the city, one of the things that we're being led to spend money on is HVAC systems. And so the city's looking at several of its buildings, and under that, we've included both Willett and the rest of Thatcher. And so those 2 projects are being included in the city's efforts to bring air conditioning to several of their buildings. So when we put that all together, the 5 buildings that we currently have that are not air conditioned should all be fully air conditioned, with every classroom in the district enjoying the comfort of air conditioning within 12 to 14 months. Did I get all that right?
You did.
So, as a district, I know we get frustrated when the temperatures are this high, but the good news here is that through a lot of planning and support from the city, we're going to be in a very, very, very different situation very, very soon. Questions or comments about that?
Ms. Sawyer?
Hi, yes. So what about the water fountains? Is there a way we can provide waters to students so that they're not calling their families and disrupting their classrooms, having to go get those?
Yes, we can. We did provide water in many of our schools. I'm not quite sure what happened in the specific case that you're referring to. So Mr. Scott and I will follow up on that.
Okay.
And look at that, because we definitely want to hydrate, and I believe there were water delivery spaces for that.
Yep.
Gentlemen?
We brought bottled water to all of our buildings. Apparently not enough at the high school, but had water available in addition to our normal access to water, where they have thermos containers at the elementary schools and the water bottle fillers at the middle schools.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, as I mentioned in an email I did 2 weeks ago, the 8th grade has moved over, has changed its curriculum in accordance with the state standards, and we've gone to a action civics curriculum. So students learn about how government works, and they learn about how they can participate in the process, and that culminates with a project that they do at the end of the year in 8th grade, where they identify a problem that they think needs attention, and they come up with solutions, and they reach out to people who have, their hands on the levers of power to make such changes. And one, it's exciting to see these things in action. I've been drawn into it because students have been emailing me to ask me information about their particular issues and asking for help and participation in their projects. And as I've discussed, two of the biggest themes that have emerged from those exchanges with these groups of students is that they are very interested in start times, and they're very interested in adding breaks and or recess for all middle schoolers, not just the 5th grade. So it's really neat to see the kids, advocating for things that they think could make the district improved and to support their work. So it's just nice to see that finally coming to fruition.
Mr. Hill?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo your point about the letters. The letters were excellent, very well written. They really were a joy to read, and they were well thought out. And as you mentioned, they were really pointed and really thoughtful about the issues that they were bringing up. I don't want to take you off your report, but it dovetails with what you're saying, is that I had a hard time answering the question about why our schedule is the way it is, and to try to justify it in terms of biology and neurology and all of these things that I don't think are really being debated anymore about the teen brain and the preteen brain and what and their rhythms and their circadian rhythms and their stuff. So to me, I responded to the letters and said, listen, I've heard that it's because of sometimes it can be because of bus schedules, or because of parent schedules, but their letters said, what is best educationally, and I didn't have a response for that. And it really led me to think about, as we are thinking about our high school for the 21st century, that this letters were really just kind of an impetus in my mind to say, is this something we should really tackle as we, if it's only at the high school, as we move into this 21st century high school, that we don't have a schedule that's, from that is out of convenience or out of some system that doesn't drive good pedagogy. So I'd love to know a little thoughts about that, and this will be taken up later in new business if there's interest. But what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, there's no question that what we do, in some circumstances, I've called what we do to high school students work. All the science says that they should not be being ripped from their beds to be at school at 7 a.m. And there's also evidence that suggests that for the younger kids, the opposite is true, right? They're up and ready to go at the crack of dawn, and because we start later, they're often, especially the youngest students, are just absolutely tuckered out before the end of the school day. And so, the lived experience of, I think, many families and students is that the way our schedule is set up is counter to what is in their, best health and educational interests. But we know that, we don't know. We inherited the system. This is the way it was when I went to school, and I think it goes back well before that. And not too many places have been brave enough yet to change it, although there seems to be growing momentum in other districts, which might make this conversation easier. I don't think that this was designed out of some attempt to do harm, simply that there are forces at work here that have kept it in place, how inertia institutionally works sometimes. We have openly discussed as a district whether or not this is something that we should take on or not. It's in the strategic plan. It's something that we have discussed in various settings, and it was our intent to circle back on this topic in particular as part of our discussion about whether or not we wanted to reconfigure the levels, whether or not we wanted to change start times and things like that. So we're as an administration, we're very open to the idea, but we recognize that it has an impact on families, and that's been why it's a sensitive subject and one that previous attempts to engage haven't necessarily led us anywhere yet.
Just
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
one more just question about the impact on families. Like, if there was only going to be a change for the high school per se, is that something that you can, I mean, have different bus schedules and different bus companies and stuff like that? If indeed the bus contract, I mean, to me, the impact on parents might be better if the high school started late. Like, if you're only, it's a huge thing when you talk systemically about that. And again, this might be better taken up at another time, but it occurs to me when you're saying this that, incremental change might get there.
Yeah, I'm going to call Mr. Tauter to chime in a second, but I'll just say that from my perspective, the fact that, we're a 3-run district and that other districts only do 2 runs. And I believe that the fact that we do 3 runs is in part the size of the district and also is a cost savings, right? Like the transportation budget is significant and, we could have everyone start at the same time. The issue there should be 3 times as many buses. And so, we can do whatever we want to do, but there are practical implications for whatever we do. And the idea of moving high school to later in the day at the same time as one of the other levels would mean that you would have to double the number of buses you need because you would need double for that level. I'll see if Mr. Furtado says that.
No, that's exactly the case. So we have a sort of equity in student populations across our 3 levels. There's roughly 2,000 students per level. So bus ridership is sort of equal for each level. And if you were to combine any of that, as superintendent's pointing out, you would have to double the number of buses. So bringing in other companies wouldn't be the answer because our buses are dedicated to our use. We don't compete with other districts for our buses. We would simply have to contract more buses and double the cost or triple the cost.
Doris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since the 8th graders are interested in this, I think it's important because I feel like we're rehashing something we did maybe within the last year. I don't remember if it was policy or curriculum, but I know we've had this conversation and we've looked at this very in-depthly. And the big issues, if I remember, and please add or correct me, but many older siblings, high school siblings, are the ones that watch the younger siblings when they get home from school. So if we switch the times, now you don't have the older sibling at home when the younger siblings are coming off the bus. The jobs was another big one. The high school students are the ones that usually have the jobs. And if all of a sudden you shift them to get out of school at 4:30, that affects that. There were so many other factors that we heard from parents. I think we surveyed parents. I know that we did a lot of work on this. And we came to the conclusion that maybe right now wasn't the right time, something we could look at again in the future. We knew that transportation was an issue, but I know the 8th graders are interested in, so I figured I'd bring up some of the reasoning that I remember for why we didn't make that change. Thank you.
Mr. Dennis?
It was right before COVID, Mr. Storrs. Because as Mr. Sawyer mentioned, the administration was hosting a series of events at the elementary schools because there was discussion about reconfiguring and the grade, the start times was a part of that. The reconfiguration of grades, the start times, and I believe the redistricting were the 3 factors that were being discussed. And I think the goal at that point was to come up with a plan that was by the end of that academic year, which we didn't realize that academic year was, for all intents and purposes, going to end about a week later. But I think something Mr. Sawyer mentioned in his explanation was that the families are getting more of an understanding of their child's education. And I think this past year that has become evident a lot at the last April and last May when this discussion was still fresh. I had asked a number of parents that had students at different grade levels when they were noticing their child more engaged. And the elementary level parents were saying early in the morning, they're fantastic. By the afternoon, they're done. The parents of the older students were saying early in the morning, it's tough to get them going. They're better in the afternoon or around lunchtime. So I think going back to one of the things that we really had to analyze going into this academic year is that where we're first and foremost an educational institution. So I think this is a much larger conversation for than what we can include in a quick not quick superintendent's report, but I do think it's a larger discussion. It is something that absolutely will impact parents. It could have a significant financial impact on the district, depending on where we go with it. But I think it's a conversation absolutely worth having. I don't remember. I agree with Mr. Stores. I don't remember if there was a formal survey sent about it or if it was just the discussions we had at all the elementary schools.
Yeah, I don't believe there was a formal survey. I think it was more about the focus groups and the conversations that we had.
And it was mixed reaction across the district in those discussions.
So as we, conclude the strangest year of our lives and prepare for hopefully a more normal one for next year, we have to pick up some of the things that got left on the ground and abandoned for a while. And certainly redistricting is one of them, and there's no reason why it wouldn't make sense, especially where there's student interest in the issue, to bring this up more formally and put ourselves through a conversation as a district. And again, whether we're ready or not for this change, I don't know. I think that more and more districts are thinking about it. I know the biggest one that just recently switched was Newton. Maybe we're more ready than we think we are, but even if we're not, each time we have the conversation, I do think we advance the agenda, and maybe someday we get to a place where we're able to align what we know about the learners with how the district is organized.
Mr. Larson? Yeah, not to extend the conversation too long, but I do remember.
No, can you speak up?
Sure. I do remember a similar spin to some of this, that we can't just think of ourselves when we are thinking about some of these things, because we live in and amongst a number of other communities that we have a lot of interaction in. And I know a couple of years ago, we were contemplating combining February and April vacations and having one in March. And again, kind of surveying the staff and everybody that would be directly involved, we found out how many members of the staff at all different levels live in a different district. So if the parents were on vacation in March and the kids were on vacation in February and April because they lived in different communities, some staff have their kids and themselves and their job all in the same community. And some are split because we're a border community with Rhode Island. So I think we need to look obviously to see what's best for us, but I think we also have to be conscious of the fact that we're going to impact indirectly a lot of other communities right around us. So that's a little bit bigger of a decision to make than just on ourselves.
I mean, I think it's definitely a discussion that we need to delve into as we, get away from our COVID year and a half and back into reality. So I'm sure you will keep on it.
You absolutely will. Okay, I just have a few previews for you, what to expect in the next couple of weeks. The first is that this Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we have our budget presentation before the municipal council. I'm actually previously engaged at Neighbors in Dialogue that night, so Mr. Furtado will be handling the duties, which just fine. But I did want to make sure you're all aware that that presentation is Wednesday at 7. Last day of school is Wednesday, June 16th. That's a half day. Shouldn't be news to anybody, but just want to say that for anyone at home that may have an old calendar. Another important piece of information is that we did finally receive feedback from DESE on the ABA application. That's going to be reviewed at the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee next week, and we'll be back before all of you for our request for approval on the 21st. Mr. Connor will be joining us for that presentation on the 21st, and hopefully we'll make a compelling case for why you should go ahead and rate the ABA based on the feedback that we received from DESE. And then the final thing, also on the 21st, you can expect that all of the central office administrators will be submitting a report on how issues highlights from the year and what the big initiatives are going into next year. Give you a little sense of where we're headed from the various perspectives. So we'll be doing that on the 21st as well. So at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Regan for teaching and learning.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. So what I wanted to be able to do tonight is share an update on our learning for this year and recognizing that it has been, Superintendent Sawyer said, a strange year, but it really has been a year that we've learned quite a bit about ourselves. Our students have learned quite a bit about themselves and their ability to be flexible, and we just want to capitalize on that and continue to move forward. So in thinking about our goals for tonight, what I'd like to be able to do is discuss the factors that contributed to the disrupted learning, review some of the data that we have, and then also share some of the supports that we have, knowing that the learning has been unfinished for this year so that we can close those gaps. So in looking at some of the factors that we have, if you could go to the factor slide. Thank you. So in looking at some of the factors, first, I'd like to say that the interruption really began on March 13th, 2020. So we've been struggling with this for about 15 months. And we left on March 13th with an unknown virus spreading across the world. And so since then, our students have participated in 3 different types of learning. They had 3 different first days of school. They had 3 different transitions, and they had 3 different learning environments throughout the year. In preparation, before we even opened up our doors, time needed to be dedicated in the buildings to figure out how we were actually going to open them up. We had to answer questions like, where will the students eat lunch? How will they enter and exit the building? And how will they navigate through the building? Technology became our focus because we recognized that we needed to have everyone learn how to navigate the Google Meet. How does the chat work, right? And what are the norms that are supposed to be in a Google Classroom? What does that look like? From there, we had to make sure families understood what that looked like as well, and the students. And at the same time, teachers were teaching their curriculum at the same time. And so one of the other pieces that we also had to focus on and was our top priority were the health and safety protocols for all of our students. And that was, as I already mentioned, our very top priority. If you were sick, we asked you to stay home. There were mask breaks. Cleaning materials were cleaned in between student use. There was social distancing and management of that social distancing each and every day. Students were quarantined because they were either sick or because they were close contacts. We had pool testing to make sure we continued to maintain the safety of all of our schools. And our classrooms were set up in rows, and the collaborative environment that we fostered and once knew was completely transformed overnight. We had a social emotional emphasis. We knew that with each new learning environment, we needed to focus on that so that the culture and the climate in each one of those classrooms was renewed. We had cohorts of students when we came back to full in-person learning who had never seen each other before. It was like having brand new classmates in front of them. And we had to make sure that that classroom environment remained strong. It was important that we continued to make connections with students and families along the way, just making sure that they felt safe at home and felt safe coming to school. And, I don't need to reiterate this, but we continually kept up with the DESE guidance as it was released, when it was released, and made adjustments accordingly. So given all of those factors that were presented, it was evident that learning was disrupted. And our data shows that we were only about 20% where we normally fall in K-2. So please know, and I know we've shared this before many, many times, this is only one data point. This is only one measure, and that we know that there is not one perfect assessment out there. And even given this, even figuring out these benchmarks, some students were doing this virtually and some were doing it in person. So there are so many variables when we're looking at this data, but it is a point of reference for us as we move forward to see where we are right now and where we need to go moving forward. So in K-2, so kindergarten, first grade and second grade, there was a bit of a decrease in where we typically fall at the end of the year in the spring. Mr. Hill, can you hear me?
Just a
Okay.
clarifying question. Is
Yes.
the DIBELS requires reading out loud?
It depends on the grade level. Yep. So in first, second, third, and fourth grade, it requires the students to read out loud.
So just, my brain just goes to people doing this with masks on. Any impact there that you think?
So that's another variable, absolutely, about why this is not a perfect assessment and that this is just one data point that
Okay,
we
yeah.
have.
And a teacher like listens to the person reading, the student reading out loud, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. If we move to grade 3, it shows a bit of a smaller decrease. In grade 4, about a 12% decrease. And when you get to grades 5 through 8, once again, many variables here, but I did want to use this as a point of reference because students were taking it remotely, students were taking it in person, and we need to make sure that when students come back in the fall, we'll take a very close look at how they took it in person, and then we'll be able to measure that from that moment forward. At the high school, we made sure that there was definitely a focus this year on social emotional learning and relationship building. And we wanted to make sure that students had the ability to maintain or continuing to complete performance assessments, because our goal is always to continue to provide relevant learning experiences for our students, and the performance assessments is one way that we can continue to do that. At the high school this year, also, students had to come in for their MCAS testing, so they took that in person. We will be using that as a diagnostic tool to measure individual student strengths and areas of need, but then also looking at some of the curriculum patterns that will be able to come from there as well. So knowing all of this and that we do have some unfinished learning, what are our next steps? So the action items that have been listed here are to really put the supports in place that we know will help improve student learning moving forward. One is our expanded summer programming. We have many programs that are running, but 2 that I would like to highlight in particular are the credit recovery. So this year, we'll be making that program more accessible for students by reducing the cost for each course to about $25. In our middle school summer programming, we will also be providing transportation for students that will be attending those summer programs. But we also recognize that there will be some students that will not avail themselves of those programs, and we are prepared to make sure that we continue to support those students when they return back to school in the fall. There will be the full implementation of our K-2 curriculum when students return in the fall, and the high school will continue to work on their curriculum units in preparation for their new schedule in the new building. On August 26th, the first professional development day for staff will have the trauma-based and sensitive classroom-based instruction or professional development for teachers. We have a director of social emotional learning who absolutely knows that unless students feel emotionally safe and secure in their classrooms, they will not be able to learn. And so that will be also a priority for us moving forward. The tutoring in the fall will start right away. That's something that we typically start in January or midwinter, and we're able to push that towards the fall so that we can start immediately. Training for staff. So we'll have ongoing training for staff, including our paraprofessionals and educators and some of the programs that we have. And then there'll also be additional paraprofessional support for our most vulnerable students. So all this to say is that we learned this year that our learners are resilient, and an interruption can be remedied with high quality instruction and acceleration. And we are prepared and we are ready for that. We knew that there were going to be diminished results and outcomes this year for learning, and we are acting now and preparing for that this summer and beyond so that we can help our students to improve their student growth or student learning growth over time. And from this point on, we are ready. We're ready for what next year has for us. And, you know, as we said, we have a lot of things that we need to pick up that were left on the floor when we left for the pandemic 15 months ago. And student learning is also one of them. So thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. This, you know, in preparing for the meeting tonight and reviewing the data, this was, you know, it's a very troubling and humbling presentation for me, not as it relates to Attleboro Public Schools necessarily, because I don't think anything in the presentation is a reflection of Attleboro Public Schools. But I think, you know, one of probably my biggest fear as we've gone through this over the past 16 months or so, you know, is this thought of what's happened to these, you know, our children and young adults who have essentially lost over a year of their growth. And what's that going to do to them? I think the data shows that, you know, for a lot of them, they did, you know, they lost a good chunk of their learning, their education, the year of one of the most important years of their lives. So to a certain extent, I think it is confirms, you know, some of the worst fears that some of us had about what this year was going to do, and it shows what we have ahead of us. And I'm happy to hear that, you know, there's a plan in place, and I have no doubt that the administration and district is ready to take it on and acknowledge the fact that, you know, we have a big hill to get over for these students, and they deserve it, because, you know, it's not their fault that they lost a year of their growth. We need to make sure that they're on the right track. So I look forward to getting updates on how we're doing with that. Thank you. Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this data it's a little concerning, but it's understandable. Unfortunate. From what I saw, it's a drop, and I know it's only one data point. I acknowledge that, but it is a drop anywhere between 14% up to 33% as compared to the last previous 2 years. That's scary. I know that the administration is doing a lot for the students, everything that you're doing over the summer. The problem is, how do we get the students to take advantage, the parents to help the students take advantage of these opportunities? Because my worry to mirror what Mr. Wood has just said is time lost is very difficult to get back. And these students are now in a little bit of a hole as compared to where they should be if we didn't have a pandemic. And if they're not able to take advantage of the opportunities over the summer and what have you, where do we get that back? You know, when is there going to be time to be able to get that back?
So I think you're right about the summer programming. Not everyone will be able to take advantage of it for different reasons, but we are ready in the fall. We know that we'll be needing to put in extra supports for students to have more small groups throughout the day for students to really think about the actual areas of strength and the actual areas of need and really work on those, but still maintain grade level materials, still maintain, the grade level standards that we know the students can learn, and not really focus too much on the intervention, but really keep them moving forward and continue to accelerate their learning in the right direction. So.
Right. And again, I have total faith in the administration and in our staff. They do wonderful things. It's just very sad because we knew it was coming. but this speaks a lot. Thank you.
Domenici?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'll echo, very quickly the sentiments that both Chairman and Mr. Storrs have stated, and that the numbers are shocking to see, not totally unexpected. We also had about 200 students, kindergarten students, that did not even enroll this past year, which could have swayed numbers one way or the other, right? So my hope, first off, I think that, we've got a lot of good planning in place. Being on teaching and learning, I've been familiar with a lot of what we're trying to do to prepare, to meet kids where they are, give extra supports. But it also, something that Dave, you've stated for years now, right? The fact that, the budget being where it is, state funding being so far behind for so long, this isn't going to be something that's going to be recovered in years. It's going to take several years for these kids to get back to where we need them to be. And my hope is that, one, DESE's guidelines allow us to be more collaborative in our classrooms next year. Obviously, we hope from a health standpoint that that's okay to do. The 0, cases this past week are an encouraging sign, and I hope that that just continues through the summer, so that we can get back to, setting up the classrooms the way we need to, and having more of that collaboration. And I'm also hopeful from the state side that, the Student Opportunity Act comes through and it allows us to get more supports in place where we've always known we need them, but now more than ever, it's more apparent. And those are my comments.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first thing I want to do is to really acknowledge what an impactful year this was, what an unusual year this was. And yes, while these numbers are somewhat sobering, I think we need to give a great big thanks to our teachers and our families and our students. Everybody is doing the best that they could in the situation. And I really don't think that there's any blame pointing to be going on. I think our teachers just really rose and did above and beyond, doing what they were trained to do, plus doing it in a different environment, trying to learn new skills themselves as they're trying to educate our children. And I think, they're really a big part of the unsung heroes in the past year. And I just want to acknowledge them and thank them for everything that they have been doing. I'd like to ask a couple questions about the summer programs. One question that I have is, you did mention that transportation was going to be included for the middle school level. The other things that would make it this more accessible, the lunch program, the free lunch program. Can you remind me, is that going to continue through the summer? Or is that still undecided? Or is that over in June? Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you. And the benchmark data that we saw, this was for the district. This wasn't specifically for remote only or hybrid only. This is district.
Everyone, yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Johnson, there's a social service agency that will be working out of the high school in the Pitt area that will be doing the same thing as our lunch program was doing during the week.
And although these academic numbers are down, I think one thing that as a community we learned was we found our grit, we found our resiliency, we found just how far we can go. And sometimes things just have to balance out. And although the academics may be lower, hopefully this learned grit can help us focus for the next year. So I'm hopeful for that. And then my last question, I think this, Mr. Storrs, you may have asked the same question, similar question. What are some of the ways that we are going to notify our families about these programs, and what will the enrollment caps be
For the summer.
for the summer program?
Okay, so we've sent out information to families now asking for their interest. We will be placing those families that are interested, but then we've also sent out letters of recommendation to those families, asking them to join the summer programs that we have. that are planned. So our summer reading and writing camp, we've sent out letters asking them to register for the program, as well as our ELL program. Students that are in credit recovery know who they are that would need to participate in that. And then for our middle school programming, we've sent out a significant number of letters and have already had over 60 responses for students to attend. So our numbers are actually pretty encouraging so far for the summer.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Anything else, Ms. Regan?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sawyer?
I'll just jump in and make a couple comments. One, I appreciate your recognition that this reflects what we all knew would be the case, right? Anyone who believed that what we've just gone through was not going to have an impact on our ability to deliver what we normally do, I wouldn't know what to say to that person. Of course, this is the result. I think the important thing here today is we are not going to, deny that that's the case, and we're not going to pretend like there isn't a problem to be addressed, right? We want to be transparent and acknowledge what's true and express how we plan to address it. I think there's also the philosophical concern that I appreciate the committee's support on, which is that, part of the problem with our accountability system in Massachusetts is that, we're trained to use data about performance as a punishment rather than what it should be used for, which is, good information on what we need to do to change the outcome. So that's how we're approaching this. We're not going to go put on the hair shirt. We're going to look at the data and say there are real needs and we need to address them. Another comment I would make is that I think sometimes we think about these things in a faulty way. And, I think we're led to think that way. Education is not a conveyor belt, right? You don't get on and ride it to the end. And if for some reason you fall off and get put back on later, that like somehow you're behind, right? We're constantly led to think of it this way. And that's just not really how it works. And it's not helpful to think about it that way. And a point I would make about, how that isn't true is that, not all of our graduates are with us for the entire 13 years. There are kids who transfer to Attleboro on any given year. And some of them come ahead of the average Attleboro student, but many of them come behind, right? And on the day that they enter the district, they are, based on the available data, academically behind their peers. Well, our track record in getting them caught up in short order is pretty remarkable. And I think that's cause for hope here, that when we know that there's an issue and we put our effort into addressing it, students and learners can make up lost ground. It happens all the time. We do it all the time. So I think it's really important that rather than wring our hands or panic, we just get to work and address the problem that we now know exists. And we suspect it did, and now we have good data to say is real. And we're gonna take this on, and I'm hopeful that in short order, much of this will be behind us.
Thank you.
That concludes my report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Moving on, we have our minutes from our May 17th, 2021 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your packets. Do you have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or edits? All right, seeing none, Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Ms. Porter.
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Consent agenda, 10 items tonight. Motion to accept an anonymous donation of 2 new Swiss Gear backpacks with an estimated value of $110 for 2 students in need. Motion to accept a payment in the amount of $12.25 from Bay State Textiles to Phil Roberts. Motion to accept the contractual obligation in the amount of $80.75 from Planet Aid Inc. as broken down on the check receipt dated May 28, 2021. Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $230.43 from Bliss Brothers to the class of 2023. Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $75 from Target to Attleboro High School gifts donation line. Motion to accept an anonymous donation in the amount of $500 to the Attleboro Field Hockey team, Attleboro Field Hockey program, excuse me. Motion to accept an anonymous donation in the amount of $364.70 for the senior class. Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $1,508.07 from individual student lunch balances as broken down in my memorandum dated June 3rd, 2021. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $500 from kidsgardening.org to be used for a new garden supplies tools at the Brennan Middle School. And a motion to accept a cash donation in the amount of $400 from anonymous Brennan staff members to purchase Special Olympic sportswear at the Brennan Middle School.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Next, we have subcommittee meetings, policy and personnel. Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of the motions being brought forward today were voted out unanimously from the subcommittee. I'll do them in groups. The first group is minor edits to each of the policies, very minor things. The first one is policy GCE, professional staff recruiting / posting of vacancies. For the most part, it aligns with mask. There's some minor differences between mask and ours, but it's per what we do in the district. Policy GCF, professional staff hiring, and policy GCIA, philosophy of staff development, which is going to align with mask. The motion to approve all three as provided. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
And Mr. Withers?
Yes.
All right, that's number 1, 2, and 3. Next, a bunch of these, we're just noting the review date. These policies are part of our review cycle. No changes. For the most part, they align with mask. Policy GCO, evaluation of staff. GCQD, resignation of staff members. GCQE, retirement of staff members. GCQF, suspension and dismissal of professional staff members. GDQD, suspension and dismissal of support staff. KA, school community relations. KBA, school parents goals, and KLG, relations with law enforcement authorities. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Ms. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes, Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
and Mr. Hill.
Yes.
All right, great. Next, we have a motion to remove policy GDI, staff probation, and exhibits KBBA E1 and KBBA-E2. The staff probation is covered within the contract, so there's no reason to have that policy. And our practice has been to take exhibits that are more procedural and remove them from the policy binder. So that's what the E1 and E2 is. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Ms. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
And Mr. Withers.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, the members were provided the changes to the student handbooks. A big portion of it was the Chromebooks. Ms. Reagan, can you just summarize the other changes, including the shots, the booster shot?
Sure. We had made a couple adjustments because we had amendments in there last year due to COVID, with students wearing masks and social distancing and the shots. So students that are in grades 7 and 8 and 2 grades in the 11 and 12 in the high school as well.
And just the booster shot, it's required by law
Yes.
for meningitis, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And I think the only other thing was the calendar was another thing that was changed within there, and that's just the addition of the Juneteenth.
Correct.
Okay, is there any questions regarding the student handbooks? Yes, Mr.
Just because the student handbooks, excuse me, are very lengthy documents and detailed, and we've had this in the past. I reviewed the, proposed changes and looked at the handbooks. There's no changes, major changes other than what was highlighted and what's been discussed.
That's my understanding as well. Other than the information regarding the Chromebooks, and there's a big portion regarding that, the meningitis booster shots, and then calendar
calendar.
change. I believe that is all of the changes. Is that right, Mrs. Rickey?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Just wanted.
No, thank you. Is there any other questions, discussion? So we're looking to approve. Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
And Mr. Woods.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, we have 2 job descriptions. The first one is the new AVA principal job description. We were already made aware of the hire for that, but this is the job description that was provided to the members. And then a second one, the Director of Social and Emotional Learning job description. Both these were provided. Is there any questions or discussion regarding these job descriptions? Seeing none, Chairman Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Dominici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
And Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Thank you. And that, Mr. Chairman, concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. Next, we have finance and budget. Mr. Larson?
Thank you, Chairman. The Finance and Budget Subcommittee met June 6th. Mr. Tato took us through monthly budget reports and the projection for ending FY21 and looking forward to FY22 and FY23. I'll get into a couple comments on that in a minute. We also had an MSBA update. Attleboro High School continues to be on schedule and on budget. We're still waiting for an update on the roof issue over at Wamsutta from City Hall. And we talked extensively about a train comprehensive energy proposal that we'll get into also in another minute. We got an update on the maintenance and ground contract that's currently out to bid, and we're waiting. There's been a pre-bid meeting, so we're waiting for the bids to come in. They're due within the next few weeks. We also had a discussion on school lunch for next year, and then we have a number of motions to bring forward. But I'm going to do this a little bit out of order. I'd like to just have Mr. Furtado make some brief comments about the train comprehensive proposal that we're bringing forward. It involves more than half of the schools. It's a great opportunity for us. And I would encourage everyone to ask questions and also to support the motion going forward when we get to that point. So, Mr. Furtado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a unique law in the state of Massachusetts. Allows for something called a performance contract. The point of a performance contract is a vendor comes in and identifies environmental systems projects, solar projects, things as simple as low flush toilets to very complex cooling systems. And the idea is that the savings realized by upgrading and bringing to kind of contemporary standards, the systems involved, those savings essentially pay for the project. You have no funding coming out of your pocket. These projects tend to be big. The companies involved are large companies, Johnson Controls, Trane, big companies that you've all heard of. So we went through a procurement process. We chose Trane to do our work. If we were going to do work, they did a audit of our buildings and identified a first phase of work that is roughly $6 million. It involves replacing transformers, which we know have been a longstanding problem with the district. The boilers that we haven't addressed yet, addressing those. Cooling systems at the buildings, the superintendent identified at the beginning of the meeting. Again, freezing and refrigeration for food service. The list is pretty extensive, and I provided a copy to the subcommittee. And the way the process would work is the city would be required to bond for the value of the project. The bond payments would come from us based on the efficiencies realized and the savings related to those efficiencies. The terrific aspect to this is if the savings are not realized, if we do not get the money we're supposed to be getting from upgrading all of these systems, the contractor is on the hook for the shortage. So if we bond this $6 million and our monthly payment is, $1,800 and we don't realize $1,800 in savings, Trane is liable for that difference, which is a terrific way to do this. As I tried to explain to some of our facilities people when we were discussing this, because they were a little concerned, this is kind of their turf, But this is kind of a order of magnitude change to the conditions of the district. When you bring the new high school on board and you upgrade all of these systems in the rest of our buildings, their lives and their jobs change. They become true maintenance people and they stop being firefighters. The financials of the district are going to change as well, because we're not, constantly up on roofs replacing, fans and systems and that sort of thing. So it's a tremendous opportunity. The superintendent and I met with the mayor today, and the mayor also has an interest. One of the other benefits of having this arrangement in place already is the city can, or we could, if we were so inclined, spend capital dollars for them to do work without having to go through procurement processes. So, get things done rather quickly in the context of the pricing within the performance contract. So it's a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to do very large things that historically, obviously, we've never done in the context of not, again, not paying upfront money that we don't have and enjoying the benefits for the 20-year life of the equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado. And we have done performance contracts as a district in the past. I mean, I can remember at least 2 or 3 of them in the time that I've been on the committee.
We've done
It's not a new
work
issue.
like this
Yeah.
through collaboration with the utilities. Much smaller scale, tens of thousands, sometimes a couple of $100,000 for controls, but this is again transforming our mechanical base that exists right now.
Mr. Storrs.
I just want to verify, so the performance contract, would that be solely for school buildings?
So the performance part of it, the guaranteed return on the efficiency is specific to the school buildings.
Okay.
Correct.
That means something isn't solely school buildings.
So there's other things, as the superintendent pointed out, the mayor is interested in funding the kind of second half of Thatcher's air conditioning, funding new air conditioning, and obviously, if you're installing new capacity, there's no efficiency, there's no savings.
Okay.
So, but Train can do that work. They can audit, they can design, and they can propose under the auspices of this contract.
But
without-
still
without
at
any-
the school buildings. Yeah,
At
that's
the
still,
school
right.
buildings.
So I guess what I'm asking, is there any other municipal buildings that this contract would apply to other than the schools?
At the time we went out, the city had asked that we include the Council on Aging building.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. The phase 1 work does not include anything there.
Ultimately, if they do go that route at some point, would that be handled within the one contract, or would that be a separate
That'd
contract?
be a different phase of the same
Okay.
same performance work.
Is there any cost associated from our budget that would have, okay, I just
No,
wanted to verify that. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
So,
Let's get it. Sorry.
no worries. So 2 questions. One, the motion mentions all 9 buildings listed in the proposal. Just for folks at home, this does not include Attleboro High School.
Correct.
But it does list Briggs Corner School for a boiler replacement. That's one of the buildings that would come, if I remember correctly, that's one of the buildings that would come offline when the new high school comes online. So why
Yes,
would
and we updated the proposal to exclude that.
Okay, all right, so it would only be the 3 middle schools and the 5 elementary schools that are currently in use.
And so I believe they included the high school because some of the infrastructure, we're talking about those transformers. There's, I think, 37 of them. I think 1 or 2 of them may be associated with the high school serving the rest of the district or something. But
And,
correct, yes.
okay, and just to confirm, the cost savings are
Guaranteed.
going toward, are guaranteed, but they're not cost savings that are necessarily going to open up other dollars in the budget. It's just that the cost savings is that we're not spending money.
You're right, we will not be spending money on the intended costs. So today, if we're spending, again, just to pick a number, $500 a month cooling system here at Studley, I'm sorry, or Wamsutta, that $500 will go down to $200, and that $300 a month savings will be going toward the bond payment for the project overall.
And what's the timeline that? So that would be for the length of the. That would be for the length of the performance contract. Would there be any?
For the length of the bond to fund the performance contract.
Right.
Correct.
So, so at that point, is there an expectation that the systems would still be serviceable enough and efficient enough that we would then that some of those savings could start to feed back into the operating budget? So we pay the bond off in 20 years.
But we haven't dotted all the i's and crossed all the t's because we're still, as in the case of Birch Corner, making minor adjustments. But the numbers right now indicate a return during the 20 years of $1 million to the school, in addition to having the funding to pay the bond payments for 20 years. So, $1 million is, $50,000, $60,000 a year during the project. So there will be a small improvement in the operating position of the district based on this as well. However, but the real key is to not be in a room like this anymore in any of our buildings going forward. And the 20 years is less than many of the systems that we'll be replacing in terms of their age. So it'll actually be an improvement in terms of, in our ability to go spring off for the next 20 years.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you.
There's also indirect efficiencies that, as Mr. Furtado stated, that, the maintenance facility people and staff, won't be firefighting. They'll actually get to do preventive maintenance. There's also funds that, these people have for the repairs that we're hopefully taking care of, and we can put those towards, other repairs within the district that haven't, gotten to the top of the list. So we'll have the opportunity to address some other issues that have been waiting to be dealt with.
And if you want, you should Google Dayton Rehoboth. They're sort of in the middle of this. They've done a lot of work in this already. They had a different kind of approach to it. They've done a lot of solar work. We didn't do that because of the city's project. And they had less real fundamental systems issues because there were newer buildings and newer districts.
And then just recapping FY21 and FY22. We are projecting at this point to approximately have $1 million between COVID grants, transportation, and savings within the budget that we've been told from City Hall that we're going to be able to apply to FY22. We also have about $1.2 million in COVID grant that we'll be able to use to close the funding gap that we're proposing to City Hall for FY22. We had a continued conversation, as I spoke of last month. Both of these scenarios present real challenges. You're using one-time money to fill operation funds. And we're also using one-time money that won't be available next year that we're going to need for FY23. So I think, when we look forward to the conversation that we're going to have next January, which will come sooner than some of us think, we've got some serious ground to cover between now and then, and real challenges for FY23 that we see coming forward. So
Yeah, if I may. So
certainly.
If you recall, in proposing the FY22 budget, and I'm going to use round numbers, and I apologize for not having the cents in front of me, but so we proposed a level service budget at $84 million. The city agreed to fund 82 million of them. So they have the authority under the rules of the COVID grants to employ our ESSER 2 funds toward operating for the school for 22. They executed those rights, and we are using approximately 1.1 million in extra two funds awarded to the school to operate on next year. So that brought their funding from 82 to 83. And then the last million is being covered by our hopeful million surplus from 21, both in operating and transportation, which will bring us to our needed 84. And if you recall, our position 82 is, what it was because of the state using kind of depressed enrollment numbers because of COVID. So if those enrollment numbers bounce back, that's going to return $2.5 million to the district and cover this hole. If the enrollment does not bounce back, we're going to have what is our normal annual increase of, 4 million or something in that neighborhood, just to cover contractual obligations, in addition to whatever the shortfall that still remains from a lack of enrollment in our structure. So again, we've met with the city. I believe everybody is pretty clear on the risks involved with FY23. As each kind of day passes and gets us closer to the end of the year, I'm feeling a little better about us actually realizing something about $1 million carryover, again, in the two budgets, transportation and operating. So I'm feeling a little better about 22, although I'm still not sleeping quite well yet.
Not what you said last week.
And then 23 has really got me jazzed up. So we'll see. I have 18 months of sleepless nights.
Mr. Geddes.
Thank you. Is there a reason why we are using the carryover for operational costs for next year? Would would the city be open to using those to cover some of the capital improvements instead?
We would be short $1 million in level funding. So we would be looking at severe layoffs and a lot of cuts.
Yeah.
So we'd rather not do that.
That's
Mr. Storrs.
Thank you. So, let's put it out there. Is it safe to say that we are not level funded? Now, I understand that there's ways to close that gap that's being utilized, one of which is ESSER funds, and the other is carryover funds.
right.
But bottom line is the schools are being less than level funded for next year. Part of the blame, of course, is the enrollment numbers and the issues associated with that. Am I summarizing this correctly?
Yeah, it's highly. It's because of what the depressed enrollment numbers drove in terms of state foundation funding, which then dictates what the local contribution has to be, as well as the Chapter 70 funding. So both of those things are depressed because the enrollment was depressed.
So,
If I,
Yes.
we kind of hash this around at the committee, and so I think we came to the conclusion that if we were to be able to use, instead of using the number from last fall in 2020, if we could use the number from 2019 and apply the same calculation to that number, we would have been fine.
it would have been a $2 million
We
difference.
wouldn't have been.
Over two,
We would have been
2.3.
fine.
That's just crazy.
So that,
It is.
so the concern is, as Mr. Furtado very eloquently said, if the students don't come back to the full extent that we think that they will, that's a variable. We're using one-time funds to close this gap that won't be there next year. That's another issue. And then, again, we're going to need to find $4 million of new funding, just for the most part for contractual obligations that we just normally have. So
And
we're not coming forward with an answer to all
No,
this. We're
just
simply
problem.
trying to present it and
Yep.
saying,
This is a reality. Yeah. So a follow-up if I can. So understanding that we are not level funded for the next school year, how does that affect the following school year? Because it's always based on the previous year. So I'm trying to think ahead. how that's going to affect.
I'm
Right,
going to interrupt it.
Yeah.
We are actually level funded for next year. We're just not
Through
funded.
ESSER funds.
We're not funded the way we would like to be
Sure,
funded.
okay.
So I guess the budget that the superintendent brought forward to the committee, funds have been found to support that.
But $1 million of that is carryover funds.
2 million of that is
Okay.
carryover and COVID funds.
Right.
So, I mean,
So that's my
it-
issue.
it's,
Yeah.
there's a yes and a no to your answer.
So the
Yes, there
COVID
is
funds I
money to
get.
support the budget that's being presented.
I can understand the COVID funds because that is the right of municipal
Yep.
to be able to utilize those funds, and that covers, let's say, half of it or more. It's the carryover funds, which is the other.
Well,
And-
again, it's because the city is so far above net school spending now, right there,
Because the
2.5.
hotel, and yeah, okay.
right? Whatever our carryover was, if we were funded normally,
Mhm.
those carryover funds would go back to the general fund. They would not
Right.
come to us
Unless we use them before the end of the year,
unless we use them. for the-
which is always what we wanted.
So, yeah, it's going to, there's no kind of
But-
net under the tightrope.
So with the question that I had though, is the fact that we're using the carryover funds, less so with the ESSER and more of the carryover, how would that affect net school spending the following year budget?
Yeah, it will show the district, the city being even more above net school spending than their documents show. However, in the meeting tomorrow night, we're gonna see some really weird stuff. So the utilities the electric utilities for the year are gonna be charged to the ESSER grant. That's very close to being the same number. So our operating budget from the city's perspective, those are gonna be all zeroed out. So that's gonna look strange. The carryover funds are gonna be expended primarily, and maybe even exclusively, in sped tuition. So those are gonna be zeroed out. Again, kind of strange to vis-a-vis a normal budget. So we have to be careful when we present 23. So, because we're gonna go from 0 to millions in the course of the year, and that, not have people's heads spin off because of that.
So, I just want to make sure I understand it, but I do want to, I can't let it go. You said because we're so far over net school spending. I don't want to over exaggerate that, but my understanding on what we're looking at is, it's essentially because of the enrollment in the state funds, the city's found a way to have a Band-Aid to get us through a year to hopefully when the state comes through at what they should be. And if the state doesn't, we're going to, instead of using $4 million to meet level services, we're going to need 6.
Yeah.
If the state doesn't come through with 6 next year, we're going to be in trouble.
Which, never happens.
Right.
The enrollment has to come back or we're in a lot of trouble.
Right. Yep.
All right, well, now that I've done my bit to make the meeting longer. I've got a number of motions to bring forward, a lot of them we've just chatted about. So first, bring forward a motion to approve that the city of Attleboro enter into a performance contract with Train Technologies for the buildings listed in the proposal.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
Any other discussion? Right, Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Ms. Larson, yes, Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes,
Motion passes. The next, motion to approve the 2 new student activity accounts for the benefit of the ACA and the AVA be set up in accordance with school committee policy JJF.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Ms. Sawyer,
yes,
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
yes,
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Ms. Larson, yes, Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next, motion to approve the maximum balance allowed in a student activity checking account as stated in school committee policy JJF.
So moved.
Second.
These
If
are,
I may-
basically for the 2 new accounts that we're setting up for the ACA and the AVA.
No. So just for the committees, we have limits in the policy. However, we're required by state law to approve those limits or change those limits annually. So this is just the affirmation of the limits in the policy
Any other questions?
for this year.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Larson, yes, Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
motion passes. Next, motion to approve the closure of the dormant multicultural club account within the Attleboro High School's student activity account.
So moved.
Second.
There's just been a lack of action in this account for a number of years, and we're just looking to close it and put it in the general student activity account. Any other questions?
Just to be clear,
Yes.
the club has not discontinued. It's just that their account has been inactive.
No, there is, there's no club.
There has been no club recently.
In over 3 years. Once an account has been dormant for over 3 years, we're again required to close it out, and the funds go to the student activity account in general, not non-direct funds.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Larson, yes, Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
motion passes. Next, motion to approve exercising the second year option on the 5-year contract with Sodexo for FY '22.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, concerns? So this is the end of the, next year will be the end of this contract. Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Larson, yes, Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
motion passes. Motion to approve exercising the second year option in a 5-year contract with H.L. Bloom Incorporated for transportation in the FY '22 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Similar to the one that we just passed, this is the 5th year in a 5-year in a 3-1-1 contract. So we'll be going out to bid next spring on both of these. Any other questions, concerns? Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Larson, yes, Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
motion passes. And finally, motion to send to the municipal council for approval of payment a prior year invoice in the amount of $1,248.75.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers,
Yes.
Mr. Larson, yes, Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
motion passes. Chairman, that's the extent of my
All right,
report.
thank you. New business, thank Mr. Hill for bringing up the new business that the administration is gonna take on with the start times, and thank our students really for bringing it up in their letters to us. So thank you for that. Any other new business, Mr. Domenici?
I guess it's a new business. It's more of a proclamation. Since the last time we met, we had 53 graduates of the Attleboro Community Academy and 408 graduates of Attleboro High School. Both were great graduation ceremonies. I just wanted to congratulate Principal Hickox and Principal Rooney and their staff for being able to do that this year and bring a little bit of normalcy to these students.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? No? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Ms. Porto? Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Menachie? Ms.
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.